Hi everybody, I am just going to talk to you a little bit about codependency, narcissism and neurodiversity. What's driving me to talk about this today is just all the questions that my clients come and ask me, and I suppose and maybe the link between them all. And when people get answers to the questions, I just see growth so quickly. So I'm finding myself wanting to share that those questions and maybe those answers. So let's look at codependency. The three areas of codependency: narcissism and neurodiversity. Let's look at codependency first. For me, I didn't realize I was codependent for most of my life, and naming it was amazing. It was such a freedom. It was the piece of the puzzle that was missing for me. I discovered I was alcoholic 26 years ago. Naming that was a freedom, because then I knew what I wanted to recover from. But naming codependency was another freedom, and it was another piece of the puzzle that I didn't understand was there. Where did my codependency come from? It came from looking for approval. I had no inner sense of self. I had a hole here, and I looked externally to fill that hole. And how did I fill that hole? With people, looking for their approval. So if they liked me, then I felt good about myself. But when we have low self-esteem, we look externally for approval. When we have high self-esteem, we give ourselves approval. So if I looked externally for that approval, it meant that if people liked me, I felt good about myself. If people didn't like me, I felt bad about myself. So my sense of self went up and down with how people felt about me. So it wasn't very stable, but it never made sense to me as to what was going on until I named it. But I had to name it for myself. And now when clients come into me and they say, I don't know who I am, I don't know if I ever knew who I was, I know that that's what it is. They're codependent because they are externally validating themselves, and I help them to see that. And very quickly then we work on them, their growth, but they actually are so grateful for that name being put on what it is they've been struggling with all their life. They grow very, very quickly. They now know what books to read, they now know what meetings to go to, because they now understand what it is they have. They know they're not going mad, and they know where it's come from, because what we do is we go back and we look. Often it comes from our childhood, maybe through we learned to please our parents, and that's how we got our sense of self through, if we were criticised a lot growing up, we would have then learned that, okay, to not be criticised, we have to be a certain way. So if we're this way, then we're going to have their approval. Well, then we go out into the world doing the same thing as we become adults until we're aware of what we're doing. So this is what my clients have learned too. They've come from a background, also if we come from a parent-centered background where everything is centered around the parents and not the children. The children are not used to having a voice. Everything is centered around, oh, you need to keep your dad happy, or your mum happy. And therefore the children are walking on eggshells, and they don't believe they have a right to be heard or a right to have a voice. So this is what I have learned, is that now that I have a right to have a voice, I have a right to be heard, and I now listen to what I feel. But when we grow up in that kind of background, we become cut off from ourselves. It's our only way of coping, and we are literally cut off from here down. So we end up actually becoming literally attached to everybody else's needs and not to our own, because it's literally we have a string attached to everybody, but no string attached to ourselves. So I ask my clients to cut off the string attached to everybody else and start connecting the string to themselves. Yeah, and that's how we start to recover from our codependency. We start to reparent ourselves, maybe give ourselves the parenting we mightn't have gotten growing up, and start to do some inner child work, and also start to change the rules that we've imposed on ourselves growing up. Rules we've imposed on ourselves as a result maybe of the rules that we got growing up that are not working for us anymore. Yeah. So it's really important, and that inner critic that imposes those rules on us, become aware of that. That inner critic that keeps us so stuck in our lives. It's really important that, because we wouldn't speak to another person like we speak to ourselves. So when I became aware of that inner critic, I started to change how I treated myself, and started to be kinder to myself, more compassionate to myself, and more loving towards myself. And that's how I work with my clients, to help them to see what they deserve, and to be more kinder and loving and more compassionate towards themselves. So this codependency is a real illness. It's not recognized by, unfortunately, by treatment centers. It's a central addiction, and sadly it isn't recognised by treatment centres, because I believe I was codependent before I ever became alcoholic. And I get emotional as I say that, because yes, because the pain of not being able to be myself, I had to escape from that, and I turned to alcohol. But just recovering from alcohol wasn't the whole piece. I need to recover from my codependency. So we turn to all sorts of addictions, and unfortunately in treatment centres they don't treat codependency as an addiction in itself. They see it as caretaking another addict, where it's not. It's also being in an addiction yourself, addiction to looking for people's approval at a cost to yourself. Everything is a lose-win rather than a win-win or no deal. And so is it helpful to name it? Absolutely. When I was giving courses, that was a debate that came up. You know, should we name, label people? My clients really are so grateful for a name, because now they know what to read, as I mentioned earlier. They know what meetings to go to, Al-Anon, CODA, ACOA. They've come from a dysfunctional background. But yes, it's so important to name it. It's so important to, because then they know they're not alone, they're not mad, and that they can get help from it. And they recover very quickly once it's named. So the other bit I need to say is that when we're codependent, we are just lovely feed for the narcissist. And we need to be aware. I never made that link until very late also. We are fuel for the narcissist, and narcissists need to feed. We're the giver, we're the taker, and they feed off us, right? And we allow it. That's the great empowering thing, is that if we don't allow something to happen, it's not going to happen. So we can stop this from happening. And I'm really encouraging you, if you feel that you are codependent, if anything I'm saying really strikes a chord with you, you could do something about it, and get help for your codependency. You do not have to actually feed a narcissist anymore. You do not have to please people anymore. Signs of codependency, okay? I noticed that I would have said sorry very often when I didn't need to say sorry to anybody. I would have said, justified myself, explaining myself a lot. Narcissists will make us explain ourselves, explain our feelings, make us justify ourselves. So it's like we give away signs. I remember reading something about a narcissist said they can actually smell a codependent miles away. So we're like honey to the bee, and the bee comes swooping down because they want to get hold of somebody that they can control. They might admire us initially, but then if they see any strength in us, to try and break us down. But I'll talk about that in the next bit. But yeah, it's a subject close to my heart because it's something we can change. We can't change the narcissist, but we can change ourselves. And but how can we change what we don't see? But when I saw it, put a name in it, God, life changed completely. And again, missing link of the puzzle. So yeah, thank you for joining me. I'm really hoping that if you are codependent, that you do get yourself support. I think it's really important to go to a therapist who really understands codependency and that they've done their own codependency work. If they don't actually open up about that, maybe they're not the right therapist for you. Yeah, they need to understand the dynamic. They need to have done their own work. But I would really encourage you to get support because it's so freeing. It's so freeing when you actually get to do your work. I mean, I sometimes pinch myself because I can't believe how life has changed since I have named this and done this work on myself. I got myself to a certain point when I gave up the alcohol, and it's only one day at a time. Any addiction is only one day at a time. By the way, addiction is when something has control over us and we don't have control over it. So when alcohol had control over me, but I didn't have control over it, then that was addiction. But it was the same with people. People had control over me, right? And I couldn't take my power back. Then I found I was in addiction with people. Thank God it's not that way today. I feel free. I feel happy. I have difficulties in life, there's no doubt about that. But I feel free. It's like the book End the Struggle and Dance with Life. Yeah, it feels right. It feels like that. And yeah, thank God every day. I thank my higher power every day. And I wish the same for you. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope that you listen to, you join me for my next presentation on narcissism. Thank you.